Hi, I'm Rui Branco. Welcome to Talking Youth Work, a podcast brought to you by the Future Labs project. Talking Youth Work is a series of 15 podcast interviews to youth work experts and practitioners that have a say when it comes to innovation in youth work, either because they are using creative methods to empower young people, researching on youth trends, or responsible for youth policies at international level. Like a shot of inspiration, all of our guests have a unique point of view about how can youth workers shake up, upgrade, and innovate on their daily work.
Welcome. This is Talking Youth Work, a podcast that explores what does innovation mean for youth workers. I'm Anita Silva. I'm a trainer and a youth worker in Europe. And together with Rui, who is a podcaster and a father of 2 pre-teens, we've been talking with different people about this topic. Today, we talked with Jon Ord. He is a professor in Plymouth University in the UK and a recognized expert in the field. He has several books and papers written about youth work. We talked from a critical point of view about innovation in youth work. Is innovation really needed? Are youth workers prepared to innovate? What is demanded from them? I think it was a very nice conversation about the questions we need to raise about innovation. We hope that you like it as much as we did. So, with no longer ado, let's talk youth work. Hi, Jon. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good.
We are still at the Key Action 2 Now conference in Berlin, where we've been recording a few of our episodes. And we're so lucky to have you here as a keynote speaker for the last day. So thank you so much for the opportunity to tap into your wisdom. And the first question I would like to ask you is, how did you get involved in youth work in the first place? When did this start for you?
I was involved in youth work as a young person on a project.
All right.
In 1984. It was a very innovative project, actually, because it involved a European trip. We went overland through Belgium, France, Spain, and ended up in Morocco, and we climbed a big mountain in Morocco. So it was a 28-day trip with 3 minibuses with about
how many people?
30 young people.
Wow.
So it was amazing, and it was transformative for me.
How old were you?
I was 18.
Right.
Like almost a rite of passage.
Yeah. Well, it just opened my eyes and lots of people on the project's eyes to sort of what's out there, really. I was from a town with very high unemployment and very few prospects, and it was really, broadened everyone's horizons, I think.
Yeah.
So what happened when you came back from that trip? How did you further got involved?
I think I got back into studying. I was unemployed at the time and I didn't really know where I wanted to go, but I got very interested in mountains and rock climbing and wanted to go to university, but mainly so I could go to university to go climbing than go studying. But in the end, I did get into studying, and I studied philosophy. So,
oh, nice.
So the trip was a springboard for me for a lot of different things, really. But then I got back into working as a volunteer youth worker and a paid youth worker, and I've been involved in youth work ever since, really.
All right. So you have a lot of also practical experience of what youth work is, of course.
Yeah, well, I worked I did my degree in philosophy, then I did a postgraduate diploma in youth work, which was a qualifying diploma in the UK for youth workers. So I did that in 91, and then worked as a youth worker till 2003.
Right.
So I worked for 18 years or so as a youth worker.
Nice.
In the UK.
Very cool. I'm going to just make a small break. You're going to edit this. I'm going to close that door and get my phone because. So eventually, then you became a professor.
Yes, I was married in about 95, and I had 2 young children. I think once my energies were into my own children rather than my adoption children in youth clubs, I found it I was less motivated to do face-to-face youth work, but was still committed to youth work and interested in youth work. So I moved into teaching and training and educating youth workers. So 2003, I started working at Marjon, Plymouth University, Marjon in the UK. So, I was there, been there ever since, and I was made an associate professor in about 2012.
And what subjects do you teach?
Youth work. We have a BA program and an MA program.
Okay.
In youth and community work. So we teach on a qualifying course. So they both end up on those two programs with a qualification in youth work.
Okay. And I understood that you also are involved in research in youth work.
Yeah.
What have you been doing on that side?
A lot of it's theoretical. So I write. I have a book that has a second edition now called Youth Work Process, Product and Practice, and it's about trying to identify what youth work is and articulate what youth work is, because it's still, I think, a little misunderstood, especially by policymakers and politicians. So, and also youth workers need to be able to articulate their practice. Yeah. They're very good at doing the practice, but they're not always very skilled in articulating what it is they do. So
I feel from not being in youth work field, people outside youth work field, they don't really understand what youth work is, because also the youth workers, they don't have the words to explain mostly what they're doing. They're doing, you said, they're doing it, but they don't know how to explain it, how to articulate it. Yeah.
So that's part of what I wanted to do, was try and go some way to clarifying some of the core practices, core principles, core aspects of youth work practice.
And you were just saying that some stakeholders that are involved in policy making, they don't fully understand youth work. Do you recognize common misconceptions about youth work?
I think so. I think there's an overemphasis on activities.
Right.
Keeping young people busy, keeping them off the streets, we say.
Off the streets, that's such an old, it started in the 70s already.
I know. It's,
right now we're saying, like, go back to the street, they don't play enough, they're in front of their screen.
Yeah. Or keeping them off the screen.
Exactly.
But as long as they're busy, as long as they're doing activities, then that must be good. It's good youth work. But it's much, much more than the activity. Activities are a means to an end, they're a vehicle. And if they're done well and done, you implement the right processes, then they can be really beneficial and transformative, but they're not necessarily transformative. Just being involved in an activity in itself is not going to necessarily be developmental at all.
Exactly. Taking the example of your trip to Morocco, for you it was transformative. For somebody else, might not have been.
Yeah, but it's also the processes they implemented on that. So we weren't just taken. It wasn't a tour. It wasn't get in the bus and we go drive and do everything for you. One of my responsibilities was planning the menu, so I had to plan a whole 28-day trip menu, buy all the food and cost it all out. I think we were about £1 a day we could spend, and so you had to really, that was my responsibility, that was my job. That's part of what youth work does, it delegates responsibility, it gives the power to young people to make decisions, and on the back of that, they grow, they develop.
Right. So one part of this research you were telling me before was a key action 2 you were involved now. Evaluating just this, what are the impacts that youth work has on young people? Did I got it right?
Kind of. It was. The motivation for the project was in the UK, we're really under pressure from austerity. The cuts are so severe in youth work. It's the first thing that goes because people don't value it. They don't see the impact. They don't know. They won't recognise it until once it's gone kind of thing. So we were very keen to start to try and put some markers down about the successes of projects. So we're interested in open access youth work, so club-based youth projects, and collecting stories from young people themselves about what the impact on their lives has been. And so we had 3 youth clubs in the UK, 3 in France, 3 in Finland, Estonia, Italy, and collected 700 stories from young people across those 5 countries. And then looked at the differences, and there were some very marked differences, really. Partly because of the age. It's fascinating. Italy, it's 18 to 34, you're a young person. And in the UK, I think the average age of the participants is about 13 and a half, so much younger. So what they could do in Italy was much different. they're almost planning and running businesses. They're setting up projects to sell products.
Of course, they're in the stage of their life that employability is an issue, of course. Okay. Any interesting results from that? Do you already have the results?
We have an online open access ebook. So how can we summarize it? So,
or mention one or two.
Where do I start?
One that has surprised you.
I suppose for me, from thinking from a UK perspective, because each of the 5 partners has a different perspective, because they see the results and they make the comparisons based on their own context. So for us in the UK, it was very obvious that we have an overemphasis on health and safety. Everything has to be planned and safe and controlled. So, for example, we visited, as part of the project, some youth clubs in Finland, and they have a skate park where they had it was underground, and the young people, there's 150 young people in this. It's like I think it was an old bomb shelter. It was quite a strange project, but there were very few youth workers, but none of the young people wore helmets. And our youth workers were just falling over,
How can that be possible?
Grabbing their heads, I can imagine.
And they said to the youth workers when they found, why are they not wearing helmets? Why are they not? Well, he said, but we recommend it, but we can't tell them this is youth work. They make the decision. And anyway, we've had one broken arm in 2 years, so what's the problem? So it's a big wake-up call for us around health and safety. And Italian youth worker visited our UK project and said, it's a very interesting project in the middle of Dartmoor, which is a big open wilderness area in Devon. And there's a little village in the middle, and they have one night a week where their project is open. And they said they haven't got any resources to staff the project any other time. And the Italian person said, why don't you just give them the keys? And he was perfectly serious, because that's what they do. It's all youth empowerment. It's youth-led projects. So young people are in control. They take charge. And again, the UK youth worker should have had to close her mouth. Her chin was on her floor.
Because it's unthinkable in UK to give the key to
the workers have to be in control. They have to hold the budgets. They hold the keys. They contain the young people. It's quite controlled, really. We think we're empowering, but actually, you can be much more empowering.
Yeah, you're not empowering because you don't give power.
No, exactly.
Like we discussed with Andreas. I wanted to ask you, because you said that when austerity comes, youth work is the first to get the cut. Why don't policymakers see the benefits? Because if they don't see the benefits, that's why it's easy for them to take the money out. What aren't they seeing, or aren't obvious the benefits, or they don't want to see them?
I think it's a question of values, quite fundamentally. They don't value young people. Young people don't vote.
Okay.
They're the least, proportionally, 18 to 24-year-olds are the least proportion of people who vote. So policies tend to focus on older people. They also focus on statutory services, so services that have to be delivered rather than services that are discretionary, where you can choose to deliver them or not. So it's partly political and a question of values, and it's partly the practicalities of services and resources that are legislatively prescribed.
Yeah, but I think it's also a thing, they don't see the consequences. If
no, they don't. No,
they don't want to prevent.
No,
because it's not obvious the prevention.
It's also very short-term politics as well.
Yeah.
I mean, I had a letter published in a national newspaper a few months ago because there was a huge concern for knife crime, and knife crime in the UK has gone through the roof. It's a real big issue at the moment, particularly in big cities like London and the like. And it was all about the number of police on the street. It was all about sort of, how can we address this issue?
Control.
Yeah. And I said, well, actually, these young people who are now 18, they were 10 in 2010 or 2008 when austerity came. They've grown up, all their teenage years without the services because they've been removed.
Yeah.
So that whole network of services that had been there to educate and support and encourage, and make people safe. Because actually people carry a knife because they feel unsafe. They don't carry a knife to be aggressive, generally.
No.
So it's complex, but the lack of commitment and lack of support to services for young people in the UK is really poor at the moment.
On that, I was just curious to ask you, with Brexit and with all this process, how is that affecting young people, youth workers? Again, a big question.
Yeah, so worn out by Brexit. We're still optimistic it may not happen. I think that's the first thing to say. There's a phrase, nothing's agreed till everything's agreed.
Yeah.
Well, and we're not leaving until we have actually left. So we haven't left yet. There's still, I think if there was a vote tomorrow, the opinion polls say it's something like 56% of people would vote to remain. So the public opinion has shifted. So I think people are talking about it. It is in people's consciousness, but also they are sick to death of it.
Yeah.
They're really, really
They're
sick.
becoming worn out.
Even the people who want to remain want it solved, want it sorted, want it done.
Yeah.
I think it's affecting. The unfortunate side of Brexit is it has opened a Pandora's box of racism. It's encouraged that small minority of people who are racist, who don't like immigrants, don't appreciate the benefit that immigration has provided for the country. The National Health Service would be on its knees which wouldn't be able to function without immigration.
Yeah.
And the net benefit in terms of taxation is far outweighs any of the benefits that immigrants take in terms of support and such like. So there's an educative process still to be had, and an ongoing educative process with young people, with adults as well, about the reality of some of those issues.
Do you think that if next month there would be another big political decision to be taken, where you have these double sides and maybe some fake news and wrong numbers and manipulation, do you think that the fact that the Brexit went the way it went, that people now would be more aware and more careful on choosing sides? Did it increase awareness, political awareness in the end?
I think it did amongst young people.
Okay.
And that's one of the, it doesn't really answer your question, but that's one of the interesting differences in the political makeup of the UK is that block of 18 to 24-year-olds is much more politically active. So, for example, we have 650 constituencies, so we elect 650 MPs. The constituency of Canterbury had been Conservative for 100 years, and it went Labour.
Wow.
And it went Labour because it's a university town.
Okay.
So suddenly all those students have now registered to vote and are seeing the importance of voting. So Warwick, for example, has been Tory for Conservative for nearly 50 years. That went Labour. It's a big university town. So students have started to realise they've also found an avenue and an outlet for their political views in Jeremy Corbyn and the new Labour Party. So politics is changing. It's maybe mobilised people and made people realise the importance of being politically active, both informally and more formally through voting.
All right. Well, we're talking about raising this awareness of importance of citizenship, and what it entails for young people, so they can also be actors on it, obviously, so they can better use the power that is given to them as citizens. And that takes us to this is, I would argue, one of the purposes of youth work, amongst others, but one of the purposes of youth work. So looking at youth work in general and as actors of non-formal education and education for these values and for lifelong learning of these people that now are young, but one day will not be young and will be full adults living their lives. So how do you see youth work nowadays? Did it change much from when you started?
It's very hard to sum it up in. It ebbs and flows. I think a few years ago, people were decrying the sort of, in the UK, youth work had become much more individualised. So it's much more about case management. It's much more about dealing with people with problems and solving their problems. So I think that's been a trend.
Okay.
And because resources have been, so you might have a youth, like in Plymouth, where I work on the outskirts of the city of Plymouth, so I know the kind of youth work structures and services there quite well. So you would have had a number of centres that had youth workers working in those open settings. And some of those centres have closed and they've become what's called targeted youth workers. So they work just when they have just a list of 12, 20, 30 young people who they have to visit every week and have an hour one-to-one with them and see how they're going and give them advice. And it's quite a restrictive way of working. You know, I meet youth workers and think, my hands are tied behind my back. I can't do anything.
Yeah.
I can't get them involved in groups. I can't go anywhere. I can't create experiences for them. I'm just there talking to them. So I suppose that's been a trend in recent years for youth work in the UK. But there still are open groups. There still are clubs that are operating in more traditional ways that work through conversation and discussion, and where political education and activism and making a difference in the world would still be important.
Okay. And where do you see it going in the future?
It's a difficult time in the UK. I mean, there's a guy called Tom Wiley who was the chief executive of the National Youth Agency from 1997 to 2007, and he was there in the when there was a big growth in youth work, and his view is that youth work now in the UK is as bad as it was in the 1950s.
Wow.
Whoa.
So it's been put back 50 years. And the 50s is a particularly important period because it was just before a big expansion in youth work. In the 1960s, we had 3,300 youth clubs built in England and Wales. So it's put us back to the 50s. So we have to have some investment. We have to have some commitment, to start growing again. Really, we're hanging on by our fingernails.
I'm sorry. We are in an innovation conference. Do you think that the youth work in UK didn't innovate anything, or because you can have less clubs or less youth workers, but are they doing things differently? Or is the same old getting young people together, conversation?
A bit of it is the same old. I know an Irish colleague said to me, why does youth work always look like youth work? It's just sort of, we just end up doing the same things. And to be fair to youth workers, I mean, the strange thing about UK youth work is it did grow, and it did. We have a qualifying program, so you can become a qualified youth worker. You have terms and conditions that underpin, your job as a youth worker. So we're quite established in that sense. We had local authority youth services, so each local government had employed youth workers, but our buildings, many of them were still those old 1960s buildings. So I could take you to counties or cities and say, those are the buildings. They're still here. So you're still practicing the same settings. So it lacks innovation in that sense. But that's not because of youth workers' inability to innovate. It's because they haven't got the resources. All the resources are tied in that building. Yeah. They can open that building and they can meet young people, but they haven't got much else to do in that. Yeah. So it's a little bit resource dependent.
So let's talk about those competences of youth workers. You were saying that it's not because they're not innovative. Do you think that in UK, the training that is provided for youth workers promotes the skills they need to be able to innovate? Well, taking in consideration they won't get the resources so far, but if they would have the resources, are they prepared to innovate, to adapt to new realities?
I think it very much depends on what you mean by innovate, because I think it's a big elephant in the room of the conference is what do we mean by innovation? And the talk I'll do on Friday will try and answer some of those questions about what we mean by innovation. But I think one of the things I would like to say on Friday, and I'll say now, is I think we need to think about innovation in two different ways. One is in the micro, so that's how we innovate in our engagements with young people, in those dynamic, fluid environments where conversations taking place, group dynamics are going off, and we have to choose how to intervene. What do we say? What flows do we follow? So we're always innovating in that sense. It's an innovative practice. But then we have to. There's another context which is the macro, which is the sort of social, political, historical context within which we're operating, and how we appreciate that and what we do because of it. So the technological sphere, the technological challenge, how we innovate in relation to that is key, I think. what's how we respond to the social context that young people find them in, whether they're in a rural or an urban setting, whether they're straight or gay or bisexual, or whether they're black or white. Those are key contexts that inform our practice, or should inform how we practice. Mm-hmm. So innovation is really complex. It's multidimensional. Mm-hmm. And it's based on your own experience. What's innovative to me is you've been doing for years and years. I listened to a guy yesterday talking about the big walk he does. He's got a project. I thought, that's brilliant. And then I suddenly thought, it isn't very innovative, actually. It's brilliant. I'm not saying it's not, but they've been doing that in the States for years. Mm-hmm. Wilderness walks.
Yes.
Six. I know a friend of mine in Minnesota, his daughter did it. He went on 6-month trek, and it was big sort of rite of passage for her. Yeah. So it's sort of
innovation is contextual.
Absolutely,
so what is innovative here might be new, might be old somewhere else. Yeah.
And even if it's new, it might not be appropriate.
Exactly.
For me, innovation has the components of novel and useful, because if it's novel and it's not useful, it's not innovation.
It's not innovating. It's just something new, different.
Yeah. But it also comes from a business paradigm as well. I think that's also one of the problems. And innovation in business is quite straightforward. If it's new and it's useful, it works and it continues. If it's not new, if it's new and not useful, it falls down and disappears. Yeah. Whereas in youth work, it's very different. Who decides what is innovative? So it needs a judgment.
And it needs who can do that judgment?
Sorry?
Who can do that?
Absolutely. It's partly the youth worker, it's partly the young people, it's partly the politicians. So it's probably contested as well. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I might argue that we absolutely need this innovation, but someone else might say, in the digital sphere, someone will be arguing we need to get people off screens. We need to innovate to draw them away from this technology because it's addictive. It's you can correlate mental ill health with screen time. Some people would argue. Other people would say, no, this is where young people are at. If we're not embracing the digital sphere, we're going to lose young people. Yeah. So it's contested innovation as well.
Yeah, I think it's very general innovation in all sectors, is that no solution answers to an issue, a problem, a potential 100%. Mm-hmm. And no solution is without negative consequences. So everything will have some kind of a negative turnout in some part of the process, and nothing is 100% positive for all stakeholders, for all our targeted, for all the aims we aim. So it always is what you're saying. It is always partially contested, and in youth work, because it's so relational, because it's so complex and involves so many different layers of power, so many different people, so many different interests. It's very hard maybe it's harder to innovate because it's not, here's a solution, a recipe, this will fix it. And especially because it's also a very dynamic field. It changes all the time, right?
Well, what you're describing there is the process of youth work, which is innovative. It requires improvisation all the time. But I think the way innovation is framed, it tends to be thought of as products.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be.
And the Erasmus guidance almost encourages products. Create products that will be innovative. But it is, youth work is process and product.
Yeah, it's very interesting because in Erasmus Plus, Key Action 2 especially, you are prompt to produce outputs, products that should be innovative. However, the formats of these products are predefined. It's a curricula or a book, so it's not like you're going to innovative in that format. You can propose probably new methodologies within that, and a little more actually. So it is quite limited.
I'm struggling to remember the name of the project, but I spoke to someone in the market yesterday at the conference about her difficulties of actually trying to build in some creativity and some uncertainty into her project, which was essential, really. But Erasmus were very, they didn't want her to steer away from the track that she had said she would work on.
Exactly, it's a very rigid process that expects out of the box results. Yeah, exactly. And it's very hard.
Yeah,
right?
Which is quite slightly contradictory.
John Cleese has nice sentences about that. I keep repeating it. I don't know if I said it before in a different episode. In one of his lectures, he's saying about creativity. He's saying it's very, very hard to be creative if you're reading emails all day, which is pretty simple and pretty straightforward, right? So if the system you're in, if the mindset you are in is rigid, it's very hard that you're going to have an extraordinary idea. Voila. Well, we're almost closing our conversation, unfortunately. But before we go, we have a question from our last guest. And the question he left for you is, if you had 5 million euros, in which project would you invest them?
I'm going to turn the answer on its head a little bit. And we had a funding stream in the UK a few years ago called Youth Empowerment Fund, and young people decided how the money was spent.
All right.
So, and we've made it whenever, and often we've never been very flush with cash in the UK youth work, but when at times when there has been money around, it hasn't always been well spent. I mean, we had a funding stream that built new youth centres in the UK in 2008 to 2010, where millions of pounds, I think it's about £400 million was spent. Whoa. And the argument was, well, actually, if you'd given that to the existing projects, some of these 1960s buildings that are falling apart, to do some innovation and renovation, you might have been more successful. So I think actually people on the ground are best placed to decide how best to spend any money.
So you would give it to them?
Young people and project workers, they need to decide in particular areas how best to spend it.
Very good answer, I think. So you get to revenge and leave a question for the next guest.
Should we rethink innovation? And if so, how?
Okay. I'm just writing it down so I don't forget.
I was thinking, maybe we should stop defining it.
That's my conclusion tomorrow.
Very good.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. It was lovely to have you on our little show here. And I hope that in the future there's more research like the one you were conducting on the impacts of youth work and what results it's bringing, and through the voices of young people. That's what matters the most.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
And that was our 15th episode, the last one recorded during the K-Action 2 Now conference. Hope to see you next time. This podcast is funded by the Erasmus Plus Youth Watch program, powered by Tim Maish and the editorial board of UMAC University of Applied Sciences, Kari Keuro, Jarmo Roksa and Kristina Vesama, with the support of all the Future Labs partners.